You're at your old trusty boat. You call mighty sparrow. I'm in the city of Mardi Gras.
Welcome to the Sailing into Oblivion podcast, where we sit down with everyday people who do extraordinary things. I'm your host, Jerome Rand.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Coming to you from, well, this part's coming to you from northern Michigan. I have made it back, but I'm about to leave. Headed out to Maine to hop on a boat and take that south to Florida. It's going to be a pretty interesting trip. I think I'm going to do like a solo podcast and a couple different parts on that one. But today's show, I got to sit down while I was out in Newport, Rhode Island, with one of the North Sails crew, Eric Wakefield. He sort of came up in the world with Sven, the brother of mine, friend of the show. And it was a great conversation. It was nice to sit and hear some of the ins and outs of some of the absolutely massive boats that they work on out of North Sails Newport. And yeah, Eric's a great guy. Really appreciate him spending a little time. And before I get in the show, like I always say, if you want to help support the podcast, you could sign up via Patreon, become part of the 50-something member family that is supporting this ad-free show. If you don't want to do that, you can also do the one-time donations via PayPal and Venmo. Links are in the description for that. We still got the merch line out there, all the different shirts. It's a great way to support the show. And then if you just want to reach out to the program, questions, comments, things like that, you can go to sailingintooblivion.com and check on the podcast link and contact the show button, and those will go directly to me. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Eric Wakefield. Thanks for listening.
But Eric Wakefield, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you. It's nice to do this. We talked about it with your brother a bit for a while, and it's nice to kind of finally do this.
Sven's he loves the show. Anytime I visit, he's like, dude, when are we doing our next podcast? How are my numbers doing? He's all about it. But we're here at North Sails in Newport. This is like hallowed ground for me. It really is. It's I don't know if it has to do just with the Sven connection, but I mean, North is, the biggest sailmaker in the world, and I don't know. This place is like, it's like a church to a sailor.
It's kind of cool because it's working, right? Like there's a lot going on. There's still a lot going on here. There's been a ton of sailmaking going on here since I think this place became a sail loft in 96. And it was originally Ted Hood's loft.
Oh, it was?
Yep. Ted Hood Sr. had an office here, and they did Hood Sails. Then it was Shore Sails for 2 years with Kenny and Dan Neary.
Right.
Dan Neary owned it. And then it became North Sails. They sold that to North Sails in 97, I think.
So it was Kenny and Dan. Yeah, Sven's trying to hook me up to get Dan on the podcast.
That'd be cool.
And yeah, he was kind of like, I don't know what I'd say, but I'm kind of like, these guys are like, they're huge when it comes to the sailing. What the impacts that they've had.
He really developed and honed the 3DI product. It's our 3D molded sails.
Yeah,
I think I don't know if he'd be the creator. I think it was an evolution that came from the America's Cup.
Yeah,
but once we sort of got our hands on it, Dan sort of put it together and made it a production, and like, how would you do it and repeat it, and how would you make it a product that you could get out to the people? And I think he's interesting because it's a major operation. I mean, it's one thing to sort of have everything lined up right in front of you and you're building it and you're in control, but it's another thing to sort of, how do you put all of the parts together?
Well, how do you do like the manufacturing of it all? It was interesting. I was listening to Elon Musk talk on Rogan's podcast yesterday when I'm driving up here, and he was emphasizing, he was like, listen, it's one thing to come up with the idea of something like a Tesla, but it's the manufacturing that's a hard thing. He's like 10,000 things have to all go right to be able to manufacture things. And if one goes wrong, you're still not manufacturing.
So we talk about like raw goods a lot. in sail making. We talk about it all the time. Like, you're talking about material. It's a very material based product.
And what's 3DI made of?
So 3DI is really, it's an interesting question because it's made up of whatever we can do it with. So it's more the process. So the process of 3DI is extruding fibers into sort of their filaments and extruding them and spreading them out and doing spread out tapes and laying those out over 3D molds. So that's kind of like, that's the 3DI process.
Yeah.
Now, the material that we're using,
Oh, it can be anything then.
it could be a lot of things. So, like, we have a Dacron. We've learned how to do it with polyester Dacron, and we're sort of marketing that to cruising customers who are familiar with the Dacron product, with the benefits and some of the drawbacks to Dacron.
Yeah.
Some of our higher end stuff is a blend of Dyneema and Aramid, which is, Kevlar.
Yeah.
So we start to dial it in. If you look at our product line, we have, we just did a product line update recently, and I want to say there's like 40 different tiers.
Oh,
or something.
really?
Yeah, I mean, if you go
right.
through the whole thing, but just looking at like sort of upwind 3DI product, you can go all the way from Dacron, and then as the performance starts getting added, you start adding lower stretch or higher modulus materials to the product, all the way up. We're adding carbon at our highest tier. But when you talk about like performance cruising, typically there's no carbon in it. It's typically a balance of Dyneema and Aramid.
What were like these sails on Sparrow, regardless of the Sailmakers logo on there, because that was during a different time. But Sven was a big part of that project, and that was, it's Dacron, I believe.
Yeah,
but it was heavy, dude.
Yeah, so this is like warp oriented Dacron. So this product is actually, it is a tri-radial layout, but the warp-oriented Dacron, basically when you weave Dacron, it sort of creates like a lump where one yarn goes over another. Mm-hmm. And if you were to pull that tight, you have stretch, right? So that's why Dacron has stretch, because it's got big yarns going over and under each other. And you pull it tight, fills the void, and that's the stretch. Warp-oriented Dacron, like this, basically has the warp yarns, or the strength, the strong yarns, being laid out in a path, and then they crimp the fill yarns. So the fill yarns go over and under it, but they're not actually stressed as they go over it, so it doesn't have the same kind of voids. Yeah. So you end up having
so
lower stretch on the warp
stuff. Oh, okay. And that, I don't know exactly like how many, because they measure the weight of a sail in ounces, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. That stuff was super heavy duty. I was able to put, because I still have those sails. I think the main sail has like close to 60 or 70,000 miles on it of tough sailing, but that staysail was on the deck, I think, the entire trip around the world. It never got taken. There were a lot of times I had to lash it down and just had a storm jib above it and all that stuff, but it like stayed on the deck for all 30,000 miles.
Pretty familiar with the process of your brother making you those sails.
Yeah.
So like he really he put a lot of love into it. He really took it seriously. He wanted to make you like the most durable. He really thought about safety. He wanted it to be like safe and durable and user friendly. And when we mean user friendly, you could beat the heck out of these things, and
that's what we did.
We wanted to prepare for the worst, But yeah, the weight. So with Dacron, weight is definitely an issue.
Yeah.
A lot of the control when they're trying to make the material low stretch really has to do with the resin content that goes into the material. Yeah, because the resin is what keeps everything from moving around. Oh, okay. So when you talk about weight, that's one thing. Those yarns are heavy, right? But then when you talk about like stiff, that's resin.
That's the resin hole. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I mean,
this Dacron without resin it's a bed sheet.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
True. I didn't even think about it because I don't know. You always think of Dacron sails as just like cloth, but yeah, there's actual resin in there as well.
Yeah, it holds it all together.
Holds it all together.
So when we look at like when I talk to a cruising customer who's interested in, you know, longevity, also budget, you know, it's probably the most, I'd say inexpensive. There's nothing inexpensive in sailing, but the most cost efficient material. And when I talk to them about Dacron, really, they're like, well, how long does it last for? I'm like, as long as you want it to.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you could keep servicing it, but as far as like its design, sail shape and what it's supposed to look like, that has a pretty limited time frame because of the resin breaking down.
Yeah, they sort of stretch out and they get a little blown out. You get like the big belly and the mainsail and stuff like that. And
so I deal with a lot of like sort of larger boats, and I've been on 70 footers where we've put up Dacron sails, and you can actually watch the shape travel aft as you sheet it. It just
really?
You know, big bubble moving, and it's like, okay.
But for most like cruising boats and stuff like that, if your plan is to, you know, up and down the East Coast, maybe trip to the Caribbean, maybe even Atlantic crossing or something like that. I mean, Dacron, if you're looking to buy a set of sails for the next 10 years, you'd go with Dacron.
It depends. It really depends on the boat. I mean, I work with a bunch of people with different budgets, and sometimes it's about handling. It's about easy use on the boat. Sometimes that stuff can be pretty heavy.
I was going to say, like, trying to put a reef in the main on that is still not so much anymore, because now it's definitely
Could have broken in a bit.
Oh, that resin's definitely let go a bit now. But initially, I mean, it was really tough, and it was hard. It would scrape my knuckles up something fierce because it's just such heavy, hard material. But that's what I needed. You know, that was purpose built.
So a lot of my customers are, you know, you get like a husband and wife that are recently retired. They're talking about their dreams of cruising and where they want to go and what they want to do. Those sails can work, but won't necessarily be best for them. You know, it can be a little more challenging.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah,
so
yeah.
there's some other materials. We have another product that's also a tri-radial cut. It's a Norlam. It's a laminate material. It's a little lighter, a little more pliable.
Oh, I've got somebody. One of the people that are part of like the Patreon crew. They're looking at sails. I'll have to look it up before we finish, or at least afterwards, so I can get back to her. But I think they were trying to. They gave her the option, I believe, of Norlam and then 3DI.
Depends on the customer.
And it depends. Yeah.
Like it's, you know, obviously we like 3DI. We stand behind it. We're the only people that make it. You know. But it's not necessarily the right answer for everybody.
Yeah, it's always going to depend.
Yeah, I just did. What did I do? Was it a Dufour like 45? Something like that. I did Norlam sails, and they are beautiful.
Yeah,
they came out awesome. The sail shape is great. The customer, it's easy for him to handle it. He went with a Dutchman system, which is, you know, it's a line system. Exactly. It's a line system. It's
I get a little sassy.
Yeah,
when
sail handling. He had it before I got on the boat. He enjoys it.
Yeah.
You know, he's an older gentleman.
Right.
And
people get used to their systems.
Exactly.
For sure.
And it worked really well for him. It worked well with that system.
Yeah.
He has nothing but good stuff to say about it. I feel like maybe
is it tricky to make make sails knowing that it's going to have that system
to make sure that all the holes are in the right place. Oh yeah.
I never thought. I mean, I've messed around with those on boats, you know, in the past doing deliveries, and I never liked it. I figure more stuff aloft is just never good. It's just tangling, waiting to happen and stuff.
All right,
but
so
I couldn't imagine.
I'm ready for my first Sven story.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to say, so normally when I do this podcast, like I don't even, if it's somebody that I haven't, you know, excuse me, sat down and talked to for a long time, all that sort of stuff, I try not to do a whole lot of background digging or anything like that, or even try and come up with topics, because I like to have just a casual, you know, conversation.
Yep.
All that sort of stuff. And but I did, knowing that you and Sven have, because did you guys start at North at the same time?
So it's funny. I started here in October of '98, and I think he came in during the winter, maybe around after Christmas. Like it was like 5 months or 6 months later, and we're both about the same age. So it was really interesting, both of us sort of stepping into this sailmaking. At the time, we didn't think of it as careers because
Yeah. It was sort of like cool.
Yeah, it was like, oh, this is something neat to do, something different, and we're not building houses. We're doing something that sort of different and outside of the box. Little did we know we'd work together for 20 years.
Yeah, right.
But it was a pretty interesting process of sort of learning, not just learning sailmaking, but like sort of learning to be adults at the same time.
Yeah, because you guys Sven would have been what, like 24, something like that.
No, he was 20,
22?
He was 23, and I was 22.
Did you live in Bristol as well?
I grew up in New York and transplanted from New York.
Oh, okay.
He
came down from Michigan.
So we were both sort of new here. We're not originally from Rhode Island, so it was kind of like, okay, we're here. We don't even know where to eat, so we figure out some stuff and figure out where we'd hang out. And we had a bar called Aiden's in Newport, and we spent many Friday afternoons there and Saturday afternoons. But yeah, that was sort of where we sort of bonded, I guess.
Well, my challenge was, or the only request I had was that if you had any good Sven stories.
So
shout out to Sven, by the way.
Exactly. I'm going to jump around a bit because we do have a lot of history together. So,
yeah, we don't want to like throw him under the bus.
No, exactly.
When you do that with Sven, he just automatically rolls out from underneath the other side somehow.
I've got a lot of stuff, but I think this is a pretty good one. I think he did production here. We did production here until 2007, and he was working in production. I was working in service, and he ended up moving to this program we had called Cruising Direct, which was basically you measure the sails and they'll build them. It was utilizing our manufacturing capability and trying to cut down on cost with sort of the customer service. Like, still, ultimately, it's a North Sail. It has designed by North Sails and materials from North Sails, but it didn't need as much hand-holding from a salesman.
We ordered, there was a water sports center that I was working for, and we ordered a bunch of ensign sails and stuff through.
Yeah, that's exactly what they were looking for.
We still have some of them.
And they were good sales, but they were just sort of trying out our manufacturing in Sri Lanka at the time. So some of them, they were working it out. It was they were working it out, and I think, but Sven got hooked up with them and went over to this process of making these these Cruising Direct sails. And I remember his first Dutchman. And he went and he measured, the customer agreed to pay to have him measure the old sail, and because the customer didn't want to deal with the Dutchman either. And so he measures it all out, and obviously it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get a sail.
Yeah.
And the sail shows up, and he pulls it out on the floor. Excuse me. He pulls it out on the floor, and the Dutchman is just completely. So one of the big things that you have to deal with is spreader location. So when you're dealing with a Dutchman, because you have these lines, you don't want to hang up. So they call them dead zones.
Oh yeah, you don't want to hook them right on the right.
So he went and put it all together, but ended up putting these things in the dead zone. And when you look at them, sort of the process of installing a Dutchman, they give you a layout. They show you where every little hole goes, where the pockets go. I don't know if whatever happened there, but he decided this was a pretty inexpensive sail. He wanted like an easy way to fix it. So he just folded it a bunch of times, stacked the luff cars up as if they were going to sit on the mast, and just banged some awls in it, and then
the whole way through.
Yeah, all the way through, and then I don't think that worked out for him. I know that's a possible way to do it in your head.
Yeah.
Like, but the actual where he put those holes didn't. And I remember this one mainsail, and it was like for like a little 28-foot boat. It was on the floor for about 2 weeks, a week and a half. And I was like, so you're just going to replace that, right? We're going to start over again. But it was like, it was ego involved, because it was like, we could fix this because I'm a sailmaker.
Yeah.
To like, I don't know if you can actually sell this as a product to a human being as new, and but I just remember all of us watching him trying to. It kept digging. It was like a hole, and then it was getting deeper and deeper, and to the point it was Swiss cheese, and yeah.
Oh, I'm sure the frustration. He probably was just fuming, man. He'd be like, no, I think I got it. He'd probably come in, in the morning, like, I think I got it. I got my game.
I'm sure he punched himself out and worked in the evening. And
That's he's right. Walking around that room in his Bristol apartment.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, dude, how am I going to do it? Drinking a Canadian. And be like, I got the plan. And then run back over.
I remember giggling because I thought it was funny, but I also was impressed that he just
kept going.
He kept going.
Yeah.
So,
well, he likes to, if he's going to take on a challenge, like really take it on, he'll just keep punching his way through. He won't give up. He's like a freaking, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So fast forward from that point to
he's like a badger.
Yeah, he is a badger.
That's
10,
the word
15 years later, and we hooked up with we ended up doing service for the Bucket in St. Bart's.
Oh, yeah.
And we got signed up. I set it up and sort of ran it for a couple of 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. And Sven was my go-to guy because we were a small team. It was basically 2 sailmakers flew in, and then there were 2 locals that we've worked with sort of on logistics and organizing materials. And these are all boats over 100 feet.
Yeah, that's all the
minimal.
J-boats,
Minimal
everything.
100 feet to like sort of enter. Most of the boats were in like the 130 to 160 foot range, and and I needed to work with somebody who was just like, dig in.
Give me another Red Bull.
Let's
24 hours. Let's do
it.
this. Well, there was one year where, because those boats would they started coming to YCCS there in the British Virgin Islands, and then they'd go do the Bucket. And that was when I was working at Bitter End. And there was one year where Sven arrived right after. And I don't know if it was a time where you were down there. It might have been. But
I pretty much invited him every time. He was my guy. Like, so he's really easy to travel with, to be honest with.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've traveled with a lot of people before and spent, weeks together in some foreign country and figuring it out. He was easy to travel with. He mostly listens to podcasts or reads his books, and and then he kind of lightens up in the evening and has a bunch of stuff to say, and then he passes out and he's got his, so it's like, it was pretty easy to deal with. It wasn't a lot of like, trying to figure out where we were going to eat. Like, we were pretty self-sufficient.
It's like, yeah, we just need a bar. Where's the nearest bar?
Technically, we don't need food. I think that was part of the thing. I think our first trip together, I had like tried to like figure out dinner plans and like getting groceries. And then after I realized that he'll just pick.
It's just,
he'll just pick stuff, and he doesn't
easy.
need dinner.
He's got his priorities.
Yeah, and he just like, he'll eat, but like in his own way, and like made it easy for me. And it was like kind of made it easy on timing.
Yeah. But setting up for those, because I know he told me a lot of war stories about Key West when it was super windy, going down to Antigua, and then the Bucket. But I mean, setting up for those specific, it's almost like going to war, especially if the weather's really rough. Because wasn't there one year either when the boats were in the BVI or if it was when they were down in St. Bart's, but it was really windy and a lot of stuff got shredded.
I think one of our most intense events was for sure they had a regatta. They used to have a regatta like a week before. I think that was the BVI regatta.
Yeah, the YCCS one.
Yeah, and they had a bunch of stuff that got shredded. So the boats really didn't have any direction they were going. Their next location was St. Bart's. So when we arrive, typically you arrive a couple of days early to set up and sort of.
Because you guys work like using. Are you setting up tents to be able to
literally
do
it's tents and it's a plywood floor, and we need to get the materials out, get the inverters on the sewing machines. Like there's like you're building a sail loft outside. But I started getting emails about boats heading our way with blown up kites and broken jibs, and all of a sudden I'm like, what is supposed to be the setup time turned into, I mean, we had 122-hour day, our first day, like basically it just like dug in. And then, so the bucket's a week-long regatta. So we had full 3 days on the front end, and then, it can get pretty windy down there. We had a very full regatta. And at the end, there were times you get dehydrated. I know you spent a lot of time down there. You don't drink enough water.
It's hot and it's windy.
Yeah,
it just sucks the moisture right out.
Your joints start to like clamp up, and it gets hard to move your ankles, and just like you got to stay hydrated. And I remember us like, sort of like bow-legged walking upstairs at like 4:00 in the morning, going what are we doing here? But it was nice to have like a partner in the, just somebody else going through it with you.
Well, and with that mindset, like he literally, I think in a lot of ways, even with the stuff that he does now, where he'll go out and be out there at Sky for 28 days in a row, don't stop working. And, he wears that as like a little badge of courage.
Does.
And he'll let you know. Yeah. He'll be like, "Did you see this badge?
Yeah.
You looking at it? How many days?"
It was nice to have somebody who was like-minded.
Yeah,
we were both goal-oriented. We take a lot of pride in our work.
Yeah.
And we wanted to see everything finished to the end. I don't know. I'll say this because I tell a lot of people this, but typically I work for boats and not really people. I try to make the best boat I can. It's easier for me to work for it and look at it as the boat, as the project, rather than the person. I love a lot of my customers. I think they're awesome. But I really look at the boat and go, how do we keep the boat going? Especially in those big boats with a big crew, and you don't necessarily know who even the owner is. It's like you're working to keep the boat going.
Yeah.
So, Sven and I took this sort of mindset. How many boats could we get to sail the next day? And we wanted to try to get them all. That was our goal.
Wow.
And we didn't want to leave one on the dock. So we'd work until we made it through the other side. And I think there was one or two times out of the years I've done that event that we actually couldn't finish them all. And we call those overnight repairs. And I've done overnight repairs for 25 years now.
Yeah.
Technically, they're not overnight repairs. The concept is that the repair will be fixed and you will have it the next day. I typically don't work through the night.
It's still got to come. It's got to come. Yeah. Right.
Through the night. And, in projects like that, where you have those really big projects, even in the facility we have here, some of those projects take days, if not weeks, to complete. So the concept of having 7 or 10 of them lined up with you in one night and going, okay, how do I get them all going for tomorrow?
Yeah.
There was a lot of Imagineering.
Oh, I'm sure you gotta figure that one out, because and you're really just trying to make sure that it's gonna work for that next day.
So that was a lot of what I brought to the table. That was sort of my skill set.
The MacGyver of the
I was the
sailing
guy who would figure out what material we had, exactly what material we had brought, and what we could use that was strong enough to keep the sail together.
Yeah.
And then, I'd then stick it all together, get my panels in where I wanted to, and I'd sort of slide it over to Sven, and he would run the sewing machine, and then I'd get the next one together and sort of put it the way I want it, and then slide it over for Sven to stitch. And then when Sven was done stitching, I'd do the finishing details, and then we'd both put them back in the bags, or sometimes call the crew at whatever time.
I
And
mean,
be like,
just
"Dude,
looking at the
come
bags
on,
you got out there.
This thing weighs
I think
1,200 pounds. And we're gonna, it's 2:00 in the morning. I think we're going to need help.
What's the biggest what's the biggest luff tape you've ever had to do?
So we actually just this year, and there's a lot of big boats in Europe that don't necessarily come here all the time, but we just had a boat called a Quijo, and that we worked together this spring, and that boat, as far as sheer size, broke the mold on what we have set up for operations here.
Really?
So we're basically, between our vehicles and lifts and manpower, I realized, we're probably like a 1-ton operation. So if a sail weighs, around 2,000 pounds, we're good. We can do it. We're set up for it.
Yeah.
We've got the machinery. We've got the people. A Quijo showed up. It's a catch. It's got, 2 masts. They're very close in size. Mm-hmm. The mainsails weighed 4,000 pounds apiece.
Wow.
It broke. Because 4,000 pounds, when you're dealing with an 8,000 pound payload, just getting them off the boat is complicated.
Yeah.
We ended up renting a 180-foot barge with a crane on it and pulling them out.
You're not hooking a halyard up to it.
No, you got to remove the sails from the boat.
Yeah.
You can't just pull it off the boat and hook a halyard and sort of drag it out.
Yeah.
The center of effort.
Come on, boys. Let's
it
do
gets
it.
Pretty aggressive really quickly. But yeah, so we rented a barge with a crane, and it took a day to get them off, and then it took about a half a day to get the battens out. And then once we got the battens out, they're in a parking lot. Then to roll them, it took 20 people to flake the sail.
Hey, Louise.
To roll them and sort of brick them so we could transport them. We needed a 2-ton forklift, and basically every roll, we'd lift the forklift, drive forward 3 feet, put the forklift down.
To roll the whole thing once
and
it's
then
out. Yeah.
set our straps back up and do it all again, over and over again, until you created one big roll.
Oh, yeah. Just logistically.
Logistically, it was incredibly
That's
challenging. I
unbelievable.
think for me, I looked at it and I said, I'm a problem solver. I like doing things and seeing what we can pull off.
Yeah.
But I really think 4,000 pounds was max. It did not work. Jeez. This facility is second story. Just even trying to figure out how to get into this building took me a day, and eventually hit walls every way. So I ended up, we rented space in the shipyard down in Newport, and we went into a boat shed and unbricked them in the boat shed and did what we needed, brought sewing machines down there. Kind of like the bucket, kind of similar, setup to a little triage makeshift sail loft. It was a little challenging. The guys next to us were sanding gel coat.
Nice.
Some navy blue gel coat.
Really? Wow.
We had some discussions with them on timing, realizing that they had a job to do as well.
Yeah.
And so we worked as quickly as we could, and and kept the sails clean and did what we needed to. But I think going forward, I think if I have a boat that big, I'm going to need a better plan.
Well, can you? So that's here in Newport. Is the loft down in Milford bigger?
Not really. I started looking up and down the East Coast on how to problem solve this, and I kept opening up the search parameters on what I needed, and sort of not even knowing what I needed until I actually dug into it.
Yeah.
And I think at this point now, we're if another boat like that shows back up, we're going to have a lot more planning on the front end.
Yeah, geez Louise. Yeah, I mean, you get Mirabella 5 pulling in. I don't know how big the stick is on that, but it's one of the biggest in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, we had the jib in here fine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the M5 came up fine here.
Yeah.
This was next level.
Jeez,
It's like, this is big boating.
Yeah.
You know, I have some photos of guys, you know, climbing around on the boom, and they look like ants.
Yeah, it's all you know. You look at those. You look at pictures of the real, like the super maxi yachts, and you know it's some aerial shot or whatever, and it's like, wow, it's a big boat. But it's when you zero in on a human being on it, and you're like, oh, and it's like standing next to the furling unit, and the furling unit is the size of a truck.
Yeah, exactly. The headboard is, you know, it's 6 feet tall, and it's just the perspective, the scale. You know, the scale is pretty wild. But I think, like I said, I think that is where that's going. I thought Bezos got a 400-footer now.
Yeah. And that's 3-masted, isn't it?
So that's a 3-mast. I think they have. So there's another boat called Nagoni, which is a sloop. So they're all in this sort of like, what are they, 260-foot rigs, 270-foot rigs? That I wouldn't say that they're reaching like what you can build. I'm not familiar with, you know, mass making enough to say like that's probably
what
as
the
big,
limit is.
But I know those 3 boats all have rigs sort of in that similar realm, and those are all the Nagoni was the biggest sloop I've ever worked with, and then you know, then catch, and then now a schooner. So it's big gear, man.
And it is pretty amazing. I mean, that, you know, in the end, when the boat's actually sailing, yeah, there is a time where they just hook a halyard to that main and they hoist that sucker up. There's got to be so much load on those lines. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, some pictures of Aquijo out really look like they were sailing. You know, some of the bigger boats don't.
I've never found one of Mirabelle 5 actually sailing. And there's one little promo video where it's got a reef in the main on a super light day, and they're moving obviously, but they're not like, they're not really sailing that boat.
Yeah, some of these they can wick up, and it's pretty wild. And it's like, so from my standpoint, you know, I don't think of myself as like a sailor. I think of myself as I'm a sailmaker. I'm a builder.
Yeah.
So I look at stuff, you know, sort of for the materials, and I look at the function and form and all that, and I'm like, okay, you're now pushing what I understand and like how I work with stuff.
Right, yeah. Because I mean, so if they're gonna do you guys do a lot of like new build? Like, here's this new boat, and we're gonna build the sails for it.
So
we got to figure this out.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and I am around some, you know, new installs, you know, for new boats, and sort of them figuring that out. Our design staff takes most of that on. But I'm sort of like the boots on the ground in a lot of the super yacht stuff here, at least in North America here.
Yeah. Are you out doing all the measurements and stuff like that? Or you
Measurements,
got the team?
yeah, measurements we do.
That was hard for me when they sent me all the forms to fill out to do just the main and the staysail on Sparrow. I was just like, holy cow!
It's
how many pages is this thing?
It's a lot, and you know, and it's funny because it's like you look at the questions, you're like, and you're looking through your measurement form, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, that kind of makes sense. I'll need to figure that out. But then it's blowing 18, and your little pages are blowing.
Yeah, and you're trying to stretch your tape.
Your tape measures wobbling all over. And you know, and then a lot of this stuff, you're like etching the numbers into the paper, and it kind of goes out the window a little bit. Yeah. I'm actually going down to do a new sail install on a boat called Zenji, which is a 180-footer in Antigua the end of the month.
Oh, nice.
So I'll be there to sort of make sure everything is fit and that the battens are all doing what they need to.
Yeah.
The lashings are correct and the sail is operating as it should.
So you'll end up going out sailing with them.
Yeah, I'll do the sail
put
shop
it up,
with them.
and that way if they have questions or whatever. Because I think Sven did that a lot too, or at least like when there were issues, he would fly. Because didn't he start flying everywhere for a little while?
Yeah,
and
it's kind of what we, it's sort of at a certain point. We need to get to the boats.
Yeah.
And so I'm still kind of doing that.
Do you enjoy that? Where you get to travel.
It's all right.
and stuff,
I've done it for a while. I'm sort of, my new role in selling sales is new to me. I was a service manager for 17 years. I was in service for 24 years, 23 years, and recently went over to, selling. I'm kind of into it because it's new and it's different. And there's a lot of information that, although being in the industry for a very long time, a lot of it wasn't the same, and a lot of it's not the same process. So I'm kind of getting excited about the selling process.
Well, that's one of the things I've always liked about the whole yachting industry. I mean, the whole blanket of it is that there are so many different facets that you can go down. I mean, you can start out being a sailor and then find that you like doing and actually running regattas, and then you become like an official, or you might, like take on the technical aspects of sail making, or selling the sails, or actually fixing them. And
everybody's
so
got a
cool.
different thing, and I feel like it's funny for me. I've worked around the sales process forever, and it's interesting until you're in it, really understanding what the process is. And there's a lot of people are like, oh, well, you just sell an expensive thing and it just costs a lot and then you get paid. And that's very confusing. There are lots of measurements. You're responsible for a lot. I mean, there's a lot that needs to go into it. There's a lot of logistics, where the boat is and when the boat's going to be there.
Well, and it's not like the owners are coming in and into the loft when you're halfway through a new build, and looking around. Like, when somebody's building a house, the owners typically come in and they're like, oh, we like that, we like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're delivering a finished product.
And then the other thing too is like sort of understanding what the delivery really looks like. So that's like, that's a pretty broad word. Like, are you technically putting it in a car and putting it on somebody's boat?
Yeah.
Are you installing it? Are you fitting it? Are you finishing it? There's not all of the parts come finished. You have battens to deal with, adjusting lines, and then what the expectations are, and then what the owner can provide as support, or do they expect you to do everything? It's sort of interesting, and it's been sliding all over the place. I've done installs where it's basically me by myself, to doing like an install like on Zenji, which I'm hoping there'll be 7 to 8 other people there.
Right. All right, team.
Yeah.
Go.
Where you become a team leader. Yeah, exactly. So it changes a little bit as it goes.
Yeah. Do you like the when you get into more of like the racing stuff? Or you just like all of it?
I like all of it. I like the technology and I like sail making. So I get stoked on the racing stuff. I respect the people and what they do. And
because that is kind of more of a dynamic of, we want performance over longevity in most circumstances.
And I like that, some of the, in the past, I mean, it's sort of evolved over the last decade, but, a lot of the stuff with the borderline limitless budgets are pretty cool, because it's just like, lets me do whatever. Whatever I think is appropriate, whatever works. There's always a budget, but some of those race programs have a higher budget and would let me really go free. And as long as it was right, it was done. That was kind of cool. So I enjoyed that. And like I said, it's changing. So now I have those experiences, and I'm taking that experiences to new sales, and taking it when I'm speccing sales and I'm talking to customers and I'm trying to figure out the right sale for them.
Yeah.
It's taking all of that stuff into account. So like, I'm definitely a product minded salesman.
Who really wants to get that boat. Yeah. Again, you're thinking about the boat and what they want to do with it.
Yeah. They tell me what they want and how they tell me how they use the boat, and then I'll give them the best recommendations that I can.
I think that's the kind of salesman I would like to have. Somebody who's more concerned about the boat than who's concerned with me putting a smile on my face, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, ultimately, they should be happy at the end if we did it right.
Yeah. No, for sure. you might not see that smile straight away.
Exactly.
It might be 10 years down the line where you're like, yeah, actually, I haven't had to take this into a loft.
These things are great, and it's worked out really well. And I'm hoping, that when I do it right, that's what happens.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. I'm definitely. I have. I have my own little sewing machine. I got one of those little sail rights on the boat because obviously when I go out, I'm out there for a long time and I have to be pretty self-sufficient. And I, besides that set of sails that I have that Sven had produced and stuff, I had the original sails, 20 years old. And a lot of times it's just the seams are blowing out left, right, and center. And there are a lot of times where middle of the night I've got, I'm putting a reef in and all of a sudden and just lets go.
I feel a book trade coming on. I've got Dan Nearye's book here.
I've got a copy of it. Because if I would have been able to sit down with him too, I was going to have him sign off on that one.
Because that, obviously you can gather information different now than when that was written.
Yeah,
it dates itself a little bit, but it's all there and it's all like real information.
I can get great info just from looking at some of the pictures. It gives me a good idea where I'm like, oh, that's a great way to reinforce that. Because Sven showed me a couple of things. I bought that machine for working down at Bitter End. Yep. I was like, okay, this is a trial thing because it was a nightmare down there. We used to have to take we had like 100 sailboats or something total. I don't know how many Hobie Cats lasers, but we'd have to bundle up something that ripped, take it down to Tortola. I think it was the Doyle Loft down there. And they were good people, but, just the ferry transfer, somebody taking it down taxi, you'd wait weeks and then it'd come back. And so I was like, well, let's buy one of these machines. It's like $1,000 and I'm pretty sure we'll be able to figure it out, which for that type of stuff.
That book has How to Time One. And with pictures.
Yeah. And a lot of it was me tearing apart old Hobie sails, looking at them and seeing how it was. But I remember Sven coming down. I think my parents or something were chartering down there. They all came down. And I'm working. And I was like, come on, can you just show me a couple of things on this? And I don't know if he just wasn't in the mood for it, but he kind of sits down and he's like whipping through this thing real fast. He's like, why is this like this? But he ended up stabbing himself with the shears.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And I remember being like, that's what you get, buddy. But he showed me quite a bit. And through trial and error, God almighty, we never sent another sail for the next like 10 years down to a sail loft. And we just were constantly replacing windows and patching, the batten pocket end protectors, all that sort of stuff. And I was able to take that onto Sparrow and pretty much I can fix almost anything, at least temporarily, but most times, for the long haul out there at sea.
I had a cool experience this week where I had a woman come in who works with Mystic Seaport, and she is the waterfront director, and she was she has access to this sail loft that's their sail loft for Mystic. And she came in up to she wanted to learn more about sail making. She was talking about an apprenticeship and some other stuff. And it was cool for me because it was somebody who was excited and sort of wanted to take some of the information I had and take that to a place where other people are going to learn. And got me super excited and was able to show her a bunch of stuff. She hung out for a few hours and but that book, I said, I have a book for you. You need to take this with you and read this. And she left without it. And I emailed her right after she left. I was like, you left without the book. This is the most important part.
It's the most important book right now. What's the title of that one?
Sail Care and Repair.
By Dan Nearye.
Yeah.
Is it Nearye or Nearye?
Nearye.
Nearye. That's
and he did a pretty good job. I mean, there's a lot in there, and I'm sending it down to her. I think it went out yesterday, so hopefully, Elizabeth, if you're listening, you get your book shortly.
Well, that's always. I think that's also a really cool aspect of the industry is that apprenticeship, like the sharing of knowledge, is real prevalent, And I mean, obviously, it dates back to the early days. You get the captain, you get the mate. Everybody's sort of trying to work their way up the ladder, but they're doing it from sharing experience. A lifetime that the captain is making all this experience is now getting downloaded into that mate, and then down the chain, but it's that same way in a sail loft. Because I mean, do you guys have?
We
get
don't
some
much
noobs
do
to
it
come in here
anymore.
and-
I personally did a 5-year apprenticeship
Oh,
when I
okay.
first started.
Yeah.
For a sailmaker named Dolph Gabler.
Oh, I've heard about Dolph.
And it was a lot. And
Legend.
he gave me a ton of information. It had a cost. I joke. I still talk to him, and I joke that, the cost was like my youth. That he took my youth.
Right. I've heard a few stories about Dolph. Oh, it was one of those things. Sven always said, he definitely not afraid to tell you what he thought.
Yeah, that's a kind
about
of
your work.
Yeah, there was a lot of.
And you need that, though. You can't be babied and coddled like, that.
I don't know
I
if this
guess
is appropriate, but I think he coined the word that looks like spilt fuck.
I was gonna say
spilt
that.
fuck
Yeah.
was really. I had never heard that term until working with him, and it's unique to him.
Yeah.
Really described what he thought of my work. But yeah, it was. I like the internship.
You're not going to get better
in the apprenticeship
without that sort of.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I've seen that where especially these days, not to harp on, the younger generation as an older person now, but like there's a lot of like hand holding and like encouragement when there really needs to be a little bit of
I don't know if the apprenticeships, or at least in sailmaking or in the the sailing industry, I don't know. It's a complicated conversation. I don't know if it's for today, but I sort of feel that the industry needs to make room for that. It needs to make room for training people, and we may not be set up to do that at this point right now. And I don't not just my company that I work with,
Right,
but
right.
I think
Across
the
the
board, that they need to make room for training, and it takes time. And I've heard in the past, because I do train a lot of people. I probably trained 200 people over my career.
wow, gee,
yeah,
that's a lot, man.
And a lot of people don't stick around and do it. A lot of people do different stuff. A lot of people are sort of like you, just trying to get the fundamentals of it and then sort of go on to what they want to do. And I've asked, a lot of people ask me, like, can I get a sailmaker up and running in 6 months? No.
Oof,
No.
yeah.
The answer is no.
Well, maybe to do like basic repairs or something, but not a sail
Not
maker.
a full understand. You need
Somebody
to
who can actually make a sail from scratch.
And I think it's just understanding the process, and it takes a lot of time. And there's a lot of facets to it. And I think, making the time to train somebody is important.
Are there any sail making schools?
Not that I'm aware of. I know they did in New Zealand have apprenticeships, but I don't know if that's still going. I'd be talking out of school. I'm not familiar with any active sailmaking apprenticeships or schools.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because, I mean, obviously there's sailing schools up the wazoo everywhere. for
So
the art
I don't
of
want to
sailing.
talk about any particular ones, but I've talked to a few schools about offering some sailmaking classes.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that they really prioritize, a lot of the sailing schools, job placement. And it's hard to figure out how many people who would attend that would have job placement.
Yeah, because, I mean, well, I guess because we're no longer using a palm and a needle and you actually need these pretty expensive. I mean, what does one of these sewing machines run? And these are pretty big. The ones that are
like
sitting in the floor.
40,000.
Phew. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, that throws a little kink in things, I suppose. It's not just a pair of scissors and some tape.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. A lot can be done without it. I go back to Sven and I on a piece of plywood outside.
Yeah. Right.
We're being near the water with a few materials, and we keep things going. So with the proper education and the proper understanding of the materials, you can do a lot with very little.
Yeah. But, I mean, to your point, it really is. I mean, an apprenticeship sort of system is really the only way to go about.
Yeah, it's hard to do. I think it would be hard to have like online classes or something where you're learning. It's really hands-on. And there's a lot, there's a book called The Art and Science of Sailmaking. I think I'm saying it correctly. Tom Whidden's book, and it talks a lot about the science aspect versus, which was Lowell North he was very much the science. He would try to create a really nice sail and repeat it. And then there was Ted Hood, who was the art, and he would sort of make his sail and then he would recut it to make it perfect.
Yeah.
And I think there's different ways to get there. And I think that just saying that kind of shows how the apprenticeships would work. And there's a bunch of ways to get to the end same result, and everybody learns differently. And I feel like, the hands-on is really the best way to get that information out.
Oh, I would think so, yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, I can remember probably the biggest project that I ever did was my Dodger. So you order sort of a kit, but you've got to do all the measuring and all that stuff. You got to cut the stainless first and then make like a template. And they have videos that you could watch. And I think it was a 22-hour, 24-hour project. And I knew that if I stopped at any point, I was never going to be able to pick it back up. So I just drank a bunch of Red Bull. I went Sven on it, and I just start to finish. And it's until this last trip, it survived really well, believe it or not. The last trip totally roasted it. But, it's I don't know. There's something so cool about when you create something like that, even though it's not perfect and it doesn't look as good as it would if it was professional. But at the time, it was sort of a money thing for me.
But it's yours.
But it's mine. Yeah. And when I'd sit down there and a wave would splash and I'm cuddled underneath it, I'm kind of like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah, I feel a lot of that ownership when
when
I step up for the first time, and you talk about these. You're going to put this thing on for the first time, and you look up and you're like, oh, everything just worked.
Yeah, I know, right? There's that little bit of concern in the back of your head, right?
It's funny, as a sailmaker, or at least in the position I'm in, I get opportunities to do a lot of sail trials and looking at sails, and I'm halfway weary most of the time because I know that there's always work that comes from that. Like, my job is to look and make sure it's all right, and then it's not. And then, and then, there's always, I was just talking to a young guy yesterday. I was like, I pretty much never step off a boat without a work list.
Oh, I'll bet.
There's always something you can do just a little bit different to make that a little bit easier or a little bit better.
Perfectionist.
I just think it's like, it's just you keep the conversation going. It's the boat is a living, breathing thing, really. Like, it's just always changing, and you're always trying to make it a little bit better, and always having a conversation about what we could do differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that it's the same way in, I think, every facet of anything to do with a boat. A boat can always be a little bit better, and a boat always needs work because it's in such a rough environment. Mm-hmm. I mean, if what's the worst? The most detrimental thing to a sail, I think Sven used to always say it was the UV.
UV,
100%.
100%.
If it's not covered.
Incredibly, UV is over operator error. I've seen more
really?
I've seen more damage come from UV than by people just being silly. Being silly. Yeah, I got to go with being silly, but yeah.
Because those sails are tough, but yeah, the UV is eating it alive. And I mean, obviously there's nothing you can do when you're out there sailing, but like Sven had said, he was like, when you get your boat on the dock, not a scrap of that sail should be uncovered ever.
No, and we talked about that sort of in the beginning of this conversation, was easy use. So, making the sails easy to stow is going to there's a cost to that for sure.
Yeah. And that's a Dutchman right there. No. I don't even have lazy jacks or anything on my boat, man. Because people will ask me about that. Because most people do like a stack pack, obviously, these days.
Lazy jacks are pretty sweet. Why don't you have lazy jacks?
Because I'm an ocean sailor. Like that sail goes up.
It's just in the way.
The only time that sail comes down out there is when I get becalmed, and I just literally drop it, and it's laying on the deck. Just kind of hangs out there because as soon as the wind picks back up, I'm just gonna put it back up. I mean, that west sail,
it's not a motor. You know, it's got the auxiliary thing, but that's just for getting into the marina. Like I absolutely will never motor unless I have to. So I'll get becalmed and I'll just sit out there but I won't slat the mainsail because especially that mainsail would rip the old track right off that main or right off the mast. You know, I would always have, I remember seeing I'd see rivet heads. You know, it's one of those old stainless steel tracks. It's got a rivet every 2 inches. And I'd see rivet heads on that trip right in the beginning, the first time I went through the doldrums. And I was like, oh, man, I got to take this down. And so now the boat's really pendulum swinging, but, you know, you can get used to that. You're not damaging anything. But, man, that mainsail was just so strong and it didn't stretch at all that I could not. I thought it was going to snap the boom in half a few times. I went up to the mast and I looked down as the sails slat. And that boom just bend with it. And I'm like, oh, no. Pull it down quick.
Well, I'm going to put on my salesman hat for a second. When you're ready, we should talk about Norlam. I think that's
no,
you know, sure. A little lighter, a little easier to deal with.
I honestly, that's one of the big things I'm trying to figure out now. This last trip was the last call to arms for that set of sails, and the only other Maine and Staysail I have are ancient, absolutely ancient. And they're like Kleenex, they're just dead. So I've got to figure out some new sails eventually for that, trying to go forward. But yeah, maybe we'll have to. I'd love to have that North Sails logo on there.
No, I know. We'll have another conversation another day.
Yeah, definitely. But how much time? Because I know we're way over an hour already.
I'm going to tell you right now, I actually have to be on a boat in a half hour for a sail trial.
So, all right, well, I'll tell you what. I mean,
I gotta go.
If there's anything you want to throw out, or
I think you got it all, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I can't thank you enough. If in the details of the show and stuff, I can put a link to North Sails or whatever you want. I don't know if they want it to be official or anything like that, but
I think I was pretty on task. I think Eric Wakefield at North Sails. Google me. I'm right there.
There we go. Awesome, man. Well, Eric, I can't thank you enough. And if I'm ever here again, dude, we'll have to sit down again, man. I feel like we could probably sit here for quite a long time.
Yeah. After 5 o'clock with some cocktails or something.
Bingo. There we go. All right, Eric. Well, thanks for coming on the show.